For over a century, movies have been one of the main pillars of pop culture. Through them, we have felt fear, love, pride, anger,
gone crazy! Am I the only one around here who gives a shit about the rules?
wonder, and sometimes even confusion.
Sam, it's time for you to grow up and accept responsibility. Your poor father would be appalled at your lack of promotion.
It is probably safe to say that since its inception, the film industry has conquered nearly every emotion of the human experience. But how are movies able to do this? How can a seemingly random assortment of visuals and sounds have such power over what an audience thinks and feels? To be fair, it's not strictly speaking random. In fact, almost everyone involved with a movie's production spends months of their time placing these visuals and sounds in exactly the right order. Using a bag of tricks that can be traced back to the dawn of filmmaking, certain movies are made with the sole intent of getting its audience to think and feel specific things at specific times throughout the picture. Today, I will be examining a scene from Walt Disney's production of Mary Poppins to see just how this bag of tricks is used to affect the audience's thoughts and emotions. The story of Mary Poppins follows the adventures of two children, Jane and Michael Banks, and their nanny, Mary Poppins. The film tracks the trio as the children learn lessons of maturity through a sequence of extremely bizarre circumstances. They spend an afternoon in a chalk drawing, have a tea party on the ceiling, watch as their nursery comes to life and cleans itself with a snap of their fingers, and they end the day with a giant dance party on the rooftops of London, accompanied by their friendly neighborhood chimney sweeps. From that description, it is easy to assume that the children are the main characters of the story. Although they are important, the real protagonist is their father, Mr. Banks.
And so I'll pat them on the head and send them off to bed. Ah, lordly is the life I lead.
A renowned banker, Banks has always put his job ahead of his family. Although it is clear he loves his children, we see from the get-go that he only focuses on their future through his career. This has led him to miss out on most of their childhood. Mary Poppins arrives not to teach the children, but to teach Mr. Banks, to show him just how misguided his ideals really are. She can even be viewed as a guardian angel of sorts, seeing how she originally lived on a cloud above London. The climax of the movie takes place at the bank. Mr. Banks is trying to show his kids the value of investing, but when all Michael wants to do is give his 2 pence to the homeless woman in order to feed the birds, Banks brushes him off. This results in Jane and Michael inadvertently causing the bank to shut down, and they run off into the city. Later, after that whole dance party on the roof, Mr. Banks receives a phone call ordering him back to the bank, where his superiors intend to fire him. Now that we know the context, let's dive into the scene. It begins with the kids giving their father the money they had refused to give him earlier.
Here, Father, you can have the 2pence.
We see realization hit his face as the children turn to walk away. It's important to take note of this close-up on Banks' face, because it's going to be the last one we see in a while.
Will that make everything all right?
Thank you.
The scene then fades to Banks leaving his house. The first trick Disney uses in the scene is color and lighting. As the scene goes on, the set becomes increasingly bleaker and grittier in color. Inside the house, everything is very brightly lit. However, as Banks is walking out his front door, it is noticeably darker. We can see the light from his house that he is leaving behind, giving us a sense of foreboding. The use of light and dark to symbolize the things that we know and are comfortable with versus the things that are unknown to us or that we can't understand comes up a lot in cinema. While bright lights and bright color can be used to force feelings of joy and wonder into the audience, the opposite is used to induce fear and depression by playing off of the audience's lack of visual comprehension. They don't know exactly what's going on when a character's in a dark place because, like the character, they have trouble seeing what's in front of them. Also notice how, as Mr. Banks is walking down the street, the plants have color. However, in the next shot, as he is walking through the park, the trees are black and the end of the road is surrounded in fog. This further boosts our sense of dread as to where this journey will end for Mr. Banks, even though we know exactly where he's going. Again, Disney leaves the scene purposefully ambiguous to play on our fears of the unknown. Soon, as he enters the city, there isn't a single living person, plant, or tree in sight. Banks is surrounded by huge stone buildings that are mostly covered in shadow, with the only real focus being the light that lies on the cathedral in front of him. In the beginning, I pointed out the close-up on Mr. Banks when he was still in his house. It is important because, up until now, the camera has only ever followed Banks from a distance. Disney is trying to alienate us from his character. We aren't supposed to feel what he's feeling. We are supposed to have our own, independent reactions to what is going on. After watching from a distance for the entire journey, we finally get a close-up on Banks' face. The music swells, and we are greeted to the empty stairs at the front of the cathedral. First, notice how insignificant Banks looks compared to the huge size of the cathedral. Also, notice what is missing from the shot. The thing that is missing, or in this case the person, is the homeless woman from earlier. Disney is implying that she has died. Then, in the final shot of the scene, Banks is walking towards the bank. His fate is sealed, and the bank is completely covered in shadow. At this point, Banks is barely a speck in the distance, as we watch him reach the end of his journey. So, in this one scene, here is what Disney has convinced us of without using a single line of dialogue. Banks is completely insignificant, having no real control of his life because A, he's about to get fired from the only job he has ever cared about, B, he has completely missed his children growing up and has been a mediocre father, and C, his one chance to redeem himself, giving the money to the homeless woman to feed the birds, has been taken away from him. Using camera angles, set design, scope, color, lighting, music, or lack thereof, Disney has taken the audience away from the highs of singing chimney sweeps to feelings of intense depression and sadness. Being a Disney film intended for children, we do get resolution for the characters. That being said, one of the reasons this scene is so powerful is because, even after we have seen it, we will react to it. It seems, at least to me, that I glean something new from the scene every time I see it. Another thing that is important to understand about scenes such as this one is that the effect it has on one person is going to be different than the effect it has on somebody else. That is the magic of cinema. Because this seemingly finite set of stimuli can bring about such a varied degree of emotional response, it is impossible to predict what a person might think or feel once they have left the theater. And as the audience grows and matures, film also grows and matures. I know it's hard to see this, what with all the turds that get released each year. However, as long as film has existed, there have been bad movies. On the flip side, the film industry is also capable of producing real gems, where a director uses all of his or her resources to construct not only a story, but an emotional experience.